The Battle of Avdiivka seems to be changing hour by hour, and Ukrainian commanders on the front have revealed some grim statistics about the fate of Russian conscripts in this fight. But we're going to reveal just what it means for the overall tactical situation in Avdiivka. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so here's what I thought was interesting, right? This is a report from Yuri Butusov, and he's reporting that the 1/10th, the mechanized brigade defending Avdiivka, is approaching exhaustion. And exhaustion, right, is, reflective of casualties, but it's also primarily, I think, reflective of a lack of ammunition, right? We've heard reports from other areas of the front that there is a reduction in the daily allocation of artillery shells provided to Ukrainian troops. As a result, they are less competitive in artillery duels against the Russians. Up until this point, right, we've seen Ukrainians, when they can go shell for shell with the Russians, generally the Russians come out on the worst end of it due to their inferior artillery. But thanks to Russia's influx of shells from the North Koreans, now the Russian volume can offset Ukrainian precision, meaning that Ukraine's ability to hold off Russian forces seems to be somewhat diminishing. But here is what I found even more interesting, right? This is coming to us from Julian Ropke. This is, he's speaking to a senior official within the Ukrainian government. But what they report is that Russian forces, right, are indeed pushing deeper into Avdiivka. And we're going to talk about what exactly that means in a minute when we pull up the tactical map. But the key is that the kill ratio, this is the ratio of Ukrainian to Russian casualties, is starting to fall in Russia's favor. And what that means is that right now, for every 20 Russian soldiers killed in Avdiivka, Ukrainians lose a single soldier, right? Since October, that has been about 20-1 consistently. And the reason isn't hard to figure out, right? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Ukrainian tactics when we pull up the map here, but just real quick, I wanted to mention that there's been some viral video going around Russian Telegram of a Ukrainian FPV drone. And I've talked a lot about Ukrainian tactics using their FPV drones to counter armored assaults. And that's certainly what they've been doing in Avdiivka. But if you want to see my analysis of that video, as well as support the channel, it's going to be on combatvetnews.com. This is my site that I run, right? Patreon kicked me off, right? Yeah, I make war content, guys. I don't get a lot of sponsors. Patreon refused to host my content. I literally had to build my own site. And so twice a week, I find the most viral combat footage from anywhere in the world. And then we watch it uncensored and we do a deep dive analysis, right? All the things YouTube won't let me do. So if you want to support the channel and get access to that twice a week deep dive analysis, especially this viral video going around Russian Telegram, any one of these tiers is going to get you access. Of course, if you want to support me at the lieutenant or colonel tier, man, I appreciate it so much. But check us out, combatvetnews.com. Okay, so here is the battlefront of Avdiivka. Let's zoom in here. Now, you can see a couple of notes. First, you're looking at Russian forces who have been able to, over the course of the last maybe 6 weeks, establish a foothold in these suburbs in the kind of southeast quadrant of Avdiivka. You can also see Russian forces advancing into the northern area, the urban blocks here in the northern region. They're trying less successfully to penetrate from the south, but this is kind of the takeaway, right? Is that Ukrainian tactics, because they rely on these FPV drones and their ability to see these attacks as they cross open ground, right? That's where they're strongest. The Ukrainian defenders, literally when they're on defense, conducting defensive operations, really can absolutely decimate Russian forces when they have to cross open terrain. And imagine if you're a Russian tank commander and you have to attack the Ukrainians, let's say in this tree line. Well, the only way to get there is to drive for potentially dozens, hundreds of meters in open terrain. just to get to the open field where you're going to have to do the fighting. And Ukrainians will detect this with drones. They'll see it from above. They'll send these FPV drones to just harass and harangue and disable all sorts of vehicles within the column so that whatever's left, if it even arrives to the front line, is already basically smoldering wrecks. And this strategy is very effective, right? By killing Russians before they ever get to the front lines, it preserves Ukrainian soldiers and much of their heavy equipment, right? So there's no tank-on-tank battles. But what Russia's figured out is that if they can take those 20-to-1 casualty ratios, if they can just accept them again and again, at some point, they will be able to get into urban areas like this one, right? And this isn't like super urban, but what's important is the density, right? Think about it like this. Let's say a U.S. Marine had to go 1v1 against a medieval knight, right? If they start 300 meters apart, the Marine is going to poke holes in that knight with his M4, right? If they start 100 meters apart, that knight still has basically no chance. But if they start 3 meters apart, it's like a 50-50 split if that knight can just close the distance. So in certain types of military technology, distance makes a tremendous difference. And because the Russians are a little bit like the knight in this scenario, they have outdated technology, they have outdated tactics, but if they can get what we call in modern military parlance, danger close to the Ukrainian lines, right? You know, Ukrainian infantry is sitting in these buildings. So if Russia can get danger close, then the Ukrainian advantage in precision artillery gets negated. Okay? A lot of the FPV drones aren't as effective because look, imagine a Russian squad is sitting in this building and then they're going to attack a Ukrainian squad in this one. Well, they have to cover just 100 feet or less. And that Ukraine isn't going to have the advanced notice, so to speak. Remember, the FPV drones work because the tanks drive in the open for miles, okay? No subtlety, no cover. Here, the time from when a Russian squad emerges from a building to the time it takes that building is, or it is in close contact with Ukrainian troops, is measured in minutes, right? Not enough time to fly an FPV drone and target these attacks. And so once Russia can get the foothold, it can turn it into a knife fight, so to speak, a close quarters battle. And there, the Russians still lose more men because their infantry is more poorly trained, but the ratio begins to skew closer to even. And for Ukrainians, right, they learned this at the Battle of Bakhmut the hard way, that you cannot hold terrain if it's going to cost you your best soldiers, right? One of the things that they learned in the aftermath of their big counteroffensive was that some of their most combat experienced troops, their most well-led and organized units, were attrited defending Bakhmut while a bunch of pretty green soldiers trained up for the counteroffensive. Ukraine is not going to make that mistake in Avdiivka. They're going to preserve their combat power, just like they did, you might remember 2 years ago at the Battle of Severodonetsk, right? When Ukrainian troops were being surrounded, Ukrainian command made the decision to withdraw them. But 90 days later, those same troops were in Kharkiv, pushing the Russians out, right? They were in Kherson, grinding the Russians until they fled across the Dnipro. So I say this because that is the lesson that Ukrainian forces should have taken. The truth is, Avdiivka has been glassed by Russian artillery. There's nothing left. It has no strategic value anymore. It is purely a place to kill Russians. And if you're doing so at a ratio of 20-to-1, keep at it. But the second it no longer becomes valuable, you have to enact what's called the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy says, we've held for Avdiivka for so long, why would we give it up now, right? The appropriate and rational assessment is to say, great, we have squeezed every ounce of Russian blood we could get out of this town, and now it's time to force them to run the same playbook in Orlivka or Lastochine. Imagine how many Russian lives, how much material has been destroyed taking this town, and then just force the Russians to do it again. So for Ukraine, this is the logic they're approaching. And So in a way, it is a refinement of the strategy they already pursued in Bakhmut. But we're going to see them make the decision to withdraw. And I want to point something out, that if Ukraine had a lot more ammunition, a lot more 155 shells, they wouldn't have this problem. And we've heard from Zelensky himself, he told Congress, we are okay until February. Well, guys, it's February 5th. So listen, I'm going to throw the link in the description. If you're a US viewer and you believe that Ukraine should get its own bill, right? This isn't my stance on any other thing, but there is no law, there is no reason that the US Congress can't sit there and say, listen, let's figure out our other political issues in their own bill, but we're going to pass a bill to support Ukraine. It doesn't even have to be the 100 billion that they want, right? Give them 50 billion and then debate the remaining 50 as part of this bill. But you should go to congress.gov, find your Congress member, right? Tell them where you live and write them a quick email. Doesn't have to be long. It can be 3 sentences. And you just tell them, I'm a voter in your district. I'm a supporter of Ukraine, and I want to see Congress provide Ukraine lethal aid. That's it. Respectful, 2 sentences. So I'm going to link it in the description. Of course, guys, as always, thank you so much to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com, our Lieutenant tier members. We're going to be dropping this video today, so be sure to check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.